the ways you got me blazing these trails, the ways you taking me through when I was afraid of myself, to show me what I ain't seen and tell me what I ain't heard. You put your hooks inside of me, so honestly I can't work, cause I don't hide no more, and now I know that I can be the man that I plan to.
Good evening and welcome to Heart with the Hansons. This is Tuesday, June 10th, 2014, and I'm your host, Kristen Hanson. Tonight's episode is all about boundaries. And when I originally wrote this show, I was coming from the perspective of why boundaries were so important in different areas of our life and why not having them affects you and your relationship in a negative manner. I really wanted to come across as having healthy boundaries as the foundation for a good relationship and that it being an essential building block. But no matter what I wrote or researched, I couldn't get that punch I needed for the show. It kept feeling flat and boring, and although the information is correct, it seemed so inconsequential. And even when we broadcasted it this past Sunday, there were problems galore, and it was a clear sign to me to scrap it and just start fresh. And I thought, what was the message behind this? Why is this happening to us? And then a miracle happened. By doing the research for this show, my husband experienced great healing by feeling empowered to stand up for himself, his family, and his beliefs. It isn't that he was scared of anyone. It's that Leif has been battling low self-esteem for many years. And although he is healthy in other ways, there was still that one remaining factor that had been continually violated in him. He had been beaten down in so many areas of his life for such a long time that he really didn't know what to do or how to handle it. He didn't have the knowledge or the willpower. You know, it would be so painful to watch him in torment, not being able to speak his truth. And I would watch him suffer and take on so much more added responsibility than he could possibly manage. I used to get so upset and angry at people for doing this to him, but I knew deep down he had to do it for himself. And he did. And I am very proud of him for doing so. So many of our shows are dedicated to the problems I've had. And this one is about my husband, and I am truly proud of you. I'd like to welcome to the show my husband and best friend, Leif Hanson.
Thank you, Kristen. It means a lot to me coming from you. You're the one person that everything means something.
Thank you.
I really appreciate that. Thank you all for joining us tonight. It has been a challenging time just recently. There's been a lot of things coming my way, and my old ways of just hoping it would go away just didn't work. I found myself in a place where I could only say Spirit was speaking to me. Spirit woke me up and said, stand up for yourself. This is how I made you. You're to be proud. You're to be strong. For goodness sakes, I'm a Viking. But some days the battles would be easier if there was blood. They'd be easier if you were going man to man in the most basic of ways. But this is an area where it doesn't leave scars that face outwards.
Right.
It leaves internal scars.
It does. This
is an area where sometimes it isn't the biggest person, it's the most persistent person. Mm-hmm. This time I took my power back. This time I said, you know what? I am going to set things in motion. I am going to speak my truth. Heading forward, this is what I will do. I will speak my truth. I will be true to myself, and I'll be true to what Spirit created. Mm-hmm. And that's a proud, strong father, a proud, strong husband, and a man who will take care of his family no matter what it takes. And that is what I am now.
I'm very proud of you.
So I'd like to thank all of you followers on Twitter, Spreaker, and Facebook for showing up tonight. We're over 1,000 on Twitter, and we're over 300 on Spreaker. Thank you very much. We're just blown away by these numbers. Okay, tonight we have a special guest again, one of our favorites, Natalie McGovern with Blissful Living. Natalie's an educator, certified clinical hypnotherapist, a polarity practitioner, life coach, and mentor. She'll be joining us during the third part of our show to share with us her story of boundary settings, how it affected her life, and how she was able to heal from it. We're all very excited to have her join us again. And thank you for being with us again, Natalie. you'll be able to call in later and go through our chat room with questions and to share your stories. And for doing so, we will mention you and your business on our show. Now, let me give you the number now so you can call in later. Our number is 480-409-0773. And if you're on our page on Spreaker, you'll be able to see our chat room now. We're up. We're live.
Very good. How do you feel?
I feel good. I feel empowered. I feel great. It just feels right this time.
You know, when we were doing the show on Sunday and having one thing go on after another, I said, no, this has never happened before. And like I said, even when I was creating the show, I kept thinking, what are we missing? Because usually there's always some big message or some big thing happening, and nothing was coming through. And this whole past week for the two of us has really been profound in one thing after another. We've had a lot of challenges in different areas. And last week, through our stress management class, we actually realized just how much stress Leif and I have incurred through all these circumstances, and it's like 5 times the normal level. So instead of having a heart attack, we decided we're going to take action and we're going to move forward and we're going to do it together, because that's what a team does.
That is.
And the first thing that you do in order to have a healthy marriage is create personal boundaries. And so many people was writing me on Facebook saying, what does that mean? I don't understand. Mm-hmm. So we'll start with Wikipedia's definition. Personal boundaries are guidelines, rules, or limits that a person creates to identify for themselves what are reasonable, safe, and permissible ways for other people to behave around him or her, and how they will respond when someone steps outside those limits. They're built out of a mix of beliefs, opinions, attitudes, past experiences, and social learning. Now, my personal story with boundaries is a long one, and I'm not going to get as deep into it, but I can say in my early years, especially in my teen years, I really did have poor boundaries. I would say yes to anybody. I would do what everybody wanted. I would always go along with the crowd. I didn't want to be the not cool one. I wanted to be the one that was in. And in different areas through my life, I kind of went with the flow, depending upon what it was. I had a lot of poor boundaries in relationships, my personal worth, my self-worth, and I made a lot of decisions based on that. And through my life, of course, through my other shows, you know, we all know my poor choices in men, relationships, whether it be drugs or alcohol, or not taking care of myself, not respecting myself. When I'm working, you know, working 1,000 hours and not being paid what I'm worth, I had a lot of issues all the way around. But I was able to turn that around and learn to stand up for myself, and we're going to teach you how to do that today as well.
So a little bit about my personal boundary stories. You know, I had explained a little bit about what this last week or so was like and my realizations, but, you know, it wasn't always that bright and sunny. Mm-hmm. There were times in my life, especially starting out young, I was a people pleaser. It did me nothing more than, you know, to be happy than to see people smile. Oh, thank you, Leif. Oh, that's great. Mm-hmm. And I would just take on responsibility after responsibility because that's what I did. Mm-hmm. And it made people happy around me, so that makes me a good person, right?
Right.
Or so I thought.
Right.
You know, so I thought that was the measure of a good person. And I find all that is now is a person who had no boundaries in those areas. I mean, they may not have been a bad thing, but it was one of those things. In a job, I would take on way more responsibility than I needed to. As I got older and got into software engineering, I found it was really affecting me in the area of estimating projects, because I wanted to give what people wanted to hear, what management wanted to hear. And as we find, management wants to hear something about half of what it's really going to take. And that's just the way it is, because that's a cost saving for them. So they're happy. Oh, well, this would be great. This would. But then I did have, you know, I have had a few mentors in a few areas in my career have taken me aside and said, hey, you know, you're better off to be realistic with these things and have people go, oh, well, that's what it's going to cost. We'll make a decision on it, instead of having a false expectation of what it's going to really take. So as I grew older, I got better, but now I'm hitting my stride. I'm hitting my stride, and I'm happy with it.
good. That's good. That's awesome. And it does take a little bit of time to get the hang of it. It does take the time to, because at first when you're going through life and you're doing what everybody wants, you're not standing up for yourself. And we're going to discuss all the certain areas where lack of boundaries. It could be with in-laws, can be with your own parents, with your children, with your spouse. And when we start to become empowered and lay down the limits with people, there's that, what does that mean? Yeah, there's that shock that goes on, and we teach you how to handle that as well. So we're going to talk now about self-esteem and boundaries. And when asked, most people would rather go to the dentist than deal with confrontation.
Wow.
Also, when asked, more people think that standing up for themselves or setting limits involves confrontation. Setting boundaries means speaking your truth in words and then following through in your actions. It doesn't necessarily mean having to confront someone. It means placing value on yourself and having an empowering conversation. For some, that is a very uncomfortable proposition. And the areas that people struggle with the most are standing up to their parents, their bosses, and their in-laws. They would rather take the abuse than stop the behavior being inflicted upon them. And this can also extend to their spouse and children. And we've all heard of, the mother-in-law with the arguing daughter-in-law. We don't have that issue. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But this is what happens when the husband doesn't set limits with his mother and says, you know what, the way you talk to my wife is unacceptable, and we're not going to stand for that anymore. You can't do that. But when people don't do that, it just goes on and on. So boundary violation involves people putting their agenda, thoughts, and beliefs on you and essentially forcing you to act, think, and feel the same way as they do. And when you don't, they punish you in some fashion. And boundary violators are often unaware of their actions. They often feel entitled and have no respect for you. They can be abusive, and they can be sometimes considered bullies. And they are all about their own personal gain. They are so centered in what it is they have to have or the way it has to be that they're going to ride that agenda into you no matter how you feel about it. And then when you don't go along with it, then there's a problem with you.
Right.
And we're going to talk about how these behaviors start. So go ahead.
So why is it so uncomfortable? What causes us to shut down? Is it the fear? Is it uncertainty? Why does speaking our truth bring up anxiety, guilt, and worry? Setting boundaries begins with us internally. When we have low self-esteem and low self-worth, that makes it difficult for us to know how it is we should be treated.
Absolutely.
An individual may not believe they're worth being treated nice, or they think they deserve negative remarks. Many of us have been abused or have overbearing family members, or even just have the type of personality that's a little more sensitive. They may have had parents, they may have had grandparents, or other family members that were just bullies, and no one stood up to them, and so they never learned how. They've grown up believing that it's just easier to take the abuse and hope it's over quickly than it is to go toe-to-toe with someone.
And I'd like to interject there. That is so often how this type of situation starts. There's usually a family member that because usually not being able, and I don't want to say not standing up for ourselves. So we're just going to use the word boundary or setting limits. Usually this starts in childhood. There's usually someone in the family who is very strong-minded or strong-willed and inserts and exerts their opinions often in the family, and they can be quite difficult to deal with. And your family has maybe been the type that's chosen not to deal with this, and their way of dealing with it is not dealing with it. They avoid it. Oh, here's Aunt Gert, how she is. Just deal with it. It'll go quickly, and this person comes in the door and they're rude and they make remarks and they feel entitled and they can get away with it. Well, when we don't teach our children to stand up to people like this and say, excuse me, the way you're talking to me right now is not appropriate and I don't appreciate it, and this is why. We teach our children that it's okay to accept that kind of behavior, that we should accept this because it's an older relative, or we should accept this because it's our parent. And sometimes it's a grandmother. The mother doesn't want to speak up to her mother, and it's this whole chain reaction that goes down. So it's essential in the formative years that we have these conversations with our children and say what's appropriate, teach them what's appropriate behavior and what isn't, so they can have a healthier understanding.
Yeah.